This is Charles Didachidores, BSES CRM 2, your reporter for today's class. A lot of you want to know the history of analytical chemistry. All of you wants to know who is the father of analytical chemistry is. How they make it known worldwide. Let's get into that. This is about the history of analytical chemistry. Based on my reporters, analytical chemistry began in the late 18th century with the work of French chemist which is Antoine Laurent Lavoisier. The discipline was further developed in the 19th century by Carl Fresenius and Carl Friedrich Moore. Mr. Lechodares enlightened us about the history of analytical chemistry by telling us a story. Thank you, Charles. So I'm going to tell you the story of the history of analytical chemistry. The so-called historical age of mankind only began in 5,000 to 6,000 years ago. At that time, man already possessed considerable knowledge. They worked in agriculture and in other branches of industry, and they could build and sail ships. To fulfill these achievements, they needed knowledge of many natural phenomena. Science was born with classification and use of this knowledge for man's own needs, as well as by establishing the internal relations between them. During the further development of human society, science and production were always in close contact, the development of the one resulting in the development of the other. This correlation became more marked as the structure of human society became more elaborate, so that in modern times science and technology are indistinguishable. The extent of scientific knowledge in ancient time is known mainly from Greek sources. Therefore, the history of all branches of science originates from the ancient Greek in classical Greek times. That is up the death of Alexander the Great. Greek science was primarily human science, almost entirely philosophy. The origins of numerous rules and ideas of the modern natural science are to be found in the teachings and natural philosophical views of the different Greek schools of philosophy. These views, however, did not come as the result of experiments, but mostly only by speculation. Greeks did not indulge in the analysis of the natural sciences. They examined nature as a whole and studied its pattern. It should be noted that in this field, the Greeks were very far advanced. The various philosophical schools of thought that had different views on the nature of materials and elements, and most books dealing with the history of chemistry usually give a brief outline of them. Before the advent of the Greek civilization, however, there existed people possessing a culture several thousand years old. These people, Sumerians, Egyptians, Babylonians, Phoenicians, and Jews, live in the shores of Mediterranean Sea. It is obvious from their architectural achievements that they must have had a considerable knowledge of mathematics and also of physics. This knowledge must have some influence on the early Greek philosophers. Recent studies have shown the numerous ideas which had hitherto been thought to be of a Greek origin were known at a much earlier date. For example, Aristotle's theory of the five elements of the universe: fire, water, earth, air, and ether is recorded in a very similar manner in one of the earliest Hindu works, the historian Diodorus of Sicily 1 to 2 BC. refers to this Oriental influence as follows. In all these Oriental countries, however, the people live in absolute monarchies governed by a strong central power where state and religion were inseparable. In Egypt, as in Babylon, the priests were very powerful and the control of scientific knowledge was in their hands. Presumably, most of the existing scientific knowledge was known only to the temples, and this knowledge was passed from one generation of priests to the next was a closely guarded secret in contrast to the city of states of the ancient Greeks who were mainly democratically ruled communities in which neither strict dogmatic state religion nor a powerful religious order was allowed to develop. They wanted to express and discuss their knowledge and opinions quite openly. Greek philosophy can only develop from free discussion, and its influence is to be felt even up to the present day. Later, Philip II of Macedonia conquered the Greek city-states. When the conquered is much more cultured than the conqueror, then in most cases, the latter adapts its culture. Say it was the Macedonia Empire adapted the Greek culture. Alexander the Great, son of Philip, was for a time tutored by Aristotle, the greatest philosopher of ancient times. Afterwards, when Alexander conquered Persia, Egypt, and a part of India, Greek influence spread over the whole of Western Asia, and this influence remained even after the untimely death of the conqueror. Although Alexander's empire later disintegrated, the enormous broadening of the sphere of influence of Greek science was to have a far-reaching effect. This resulted in the second flowering of Greek science, the so-called Hellenistic age, the cultural center of which was Alexandria. The knowledge of this age has a different character from that of the preceding classical ages. The Hellenistic age saw the origin of the natural sciences of today, although no great philosophical treatises similar to those which were written in the classical ages were produced as discussion and explanation of the great philosophers. Ideas was begun, the study was continued throughout the Hellenistic age and lasted even until the 16th and 17th centuries. In addition to this critical study of philosophy, the recently originated natural sciences underwent an enormous expansion. It is very probable that this sudden surge in the growth of natural sciences was due to the fact that scientific knowledge over thousands of years, which had hitherto been a close secret in the hands of Egyptian and Babylonian priesthood, was now open to investigation by the free-thinking Greeks. Archimedes, 287 to 212 BC, and Heron, 2nd century BC, the first great names in the field of mechanics, live at the beginning of Hellenistic times. Euclid, 3rd century BC, was the founder of geometry. Hipparchus, 2nd century BC, and Eratosthenes, 276 to 195 BC, were the first great masters of astronomy. This age, especially in the oriental shores of the Mediterranean Sea, lasted until the Arabs conquered Syria and Egypt in the 8th century. Chemistry first appeared at the end of the second part of this age, and the early form of this science in particular stemmed from the marriage of Greek philosophy and the mystic secret sciences of the Eastern peoples. Thank you. Back to you, Charles. Oh, thank you, Mr. Luchadores. You gave us the hint of the history of analytical chemistry. It can be the good influence to study more about the history of analytical chemistry. Anyways, and now we will continue to tackle about who is the father of history of analytical chemistry. Who is the father of analytical chemistry? It's Isaac Moritz Kolthoff. 1894 to 1993, is widely regarded as the father of modern analytical chemistry. His research transformed the ways by which scientists separate, identify, and quantify chemical substances and built the field upon solid theoretical principles and experimental techniques. So, we all know the viral sensation named Mr. Luchadores, who gained 6 million views on YouTube and 5 million views on Facebook and 10 million views on TikTok, and gains a lot of followers on IG and Twitter. And also not just from singing, he is very interested about history of analytical chemistry. Because of that, he got inspired by it and wrote a song about history of analytical chemistry. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you, Charles. This lyrics I'm holding now is for you, my fans, my beloved fans. And by the way, I wrote these lyrics on the spot, so hope you like it. And specifically the history and the significant step of the evolution of analytical chemistry are presented in chronological time spans covering the ancient world, the Middle Ages, the period of the 19th century, and the evolution period from the verge of the 19th century to contemporary times in easy given information for the progress of chemistry. Analytical chemistry during this period, analytical chemistry more gradually from its theoretical nature to more scientific activities. La 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 la, scientific transforming itself to autonomous branch of chemistry and assay power discipline. It is so certain that analytical chemistry move gradually from the status of exclusive, serving the chemical science towards serving the environment. Health law out of control, and that the evolutionary period from the verge of the 19th century to contemporary times. It is given info for the progress of chemistry and analytical chemistry during this period. Analytical chemistry more gradually from its group empirical nature to more scientific activities. Oh yeah, almost all areas of science and technology that Albert society. Some recommendations are also directed to analytical chemistry, educator concerning the inexpressible nature of knowledge of classical analytical chemistry and associated working exercises and to analysis. In general, what is important to use the chemical knowledge to make measurements on problems of everyday life. I can't stop me, the wow. Analytical chemistry featuring this period. Analytical chemistry more gradual, really from its pure empirical nature to more scientific activities. La 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 la, scientific activities. Thank you so much, Charles. Oh, the song is so lovely. It can have nature vibes. It's so good to hear that song. Thank you. Thank you, Charles, Mr. Lucidaris. Anyway, let's continue the history of analytical chemistry. As a pharmacist apprentice in Frankfurt, Germany, Fresenius developed an extensive qualitative analysis scheme that, when it was later published, served as the first textbook of analytical chemistry. He built a laboratory at his house that opened in 1848. Here, he trained students in gravimetric techniques that he had developed. More developed laboratory devices such as the pinch clamp borate and volumetric pipette. He always devised a colorimetric endpoint for silver titrations. It was his 1855 book on titrimetry, Lehrbuch der Chemist Analytischen Titan method that generated widespread interest in the technique. Analytical chemistry, especially in those days, was bare of almost any scientific interpretation. It became clear to me that such an understanding was not only necessary to increase the prestige of analytical chemistry as a real science by providing these interpretations, but that a good understanding of physical, chemical, and physicochemical fundamentals would lead to the development of new methods, improvement of existing methods, and to the calculation of errors in analytical procedures. Thank you all. Hoping you all understand my reports for today's class. Reporting, Charles Digitaris, PSCRM, Duluth.